Mlinzi, Africa, where we talk about issues that are vital for Africa. And of course, um, we used to be called Ubuntu Awakening. We have rebranded. Last time I spoke to you, we did talk about the US empire and the decline. And there was quite a bit of pushback, obviously, from Trump fans, I believe. But I mean, we had to talk about that. And now, with Donald Trump putting South Africa in his crosshairs, in his crosshairs, we cannot talk about it. But the thing that interested in me was what is happening with the domestic situation in the US. By the way, apologies that we're not able to go live at 6 when we were meant to. Um, Technology tends to let you down right when it counts. And that's why you see my visual quality is not great. The camera is acting up, the mic is acting up, everything. But I hope the sound is clear because that's what's most important, that you hear me. It's not so important that you see my face. But um, the question I had on my mind as I observed the fallout post the U.S. elections. I mean, it just went crazy with coming out to express regret. This is the mega base, and I mean, you could say this is staged or whatever, but I watched even town hall meetings where the Republican base were voicing concerns over the policy positions and decisions that were being taken that were affecting them as ordinary working class people. Apart, right? The whole right wing narrative. Once now the class contradictions start to express themselves. So now MAGA, the MAGA base, the Trump base are finding out that actually, once the healthcare started to be cut, social spending and everything, uh, spending on veterans and so on, and it, it's the same thing that would happen everywhere, even here in South Africa. Uh, Ordinary, working class people like myself who would then go and subscribe to all this right wing ideology. You, you know, I put in the title of my scheduled life the FAFO. You know FAFO? F around and find out. uh, there's a lot of that that's been going around lately. Um, and then, excuse me, all the minorities that voted for Donald Trump, the Latino community, and I even saw a representative of the Venezuelan in the U.S. them, but that's what he said he was gonna do. I don't get it. I mean, that was the plan all along, to deport anyone who is seen as undesirable. And then the lady who represents the Venezuelan people says, "I thought they were only going to deport the criminals." And that's what happens. That's the thing that really interests me. What is it that in the right wing messaging, what is it about it that you just can't get it? You don't see it. I mean, for me, it's quite obvious, but I don't know, man. I feel like other people, now that they've made bad decisions with their votes and everything, now they're regretting and they're shocked that Donald Trump is doing what he said. It's so strange to me. But that's the question I have. Why would ordinary working class people identify with and vote against their own class interests? only to regret their vote later. And I think one of the expressions that Professor Richard Wolff likes to use is it's make believe. you know, it's make believe. They play on all of these moralist issues and so on. I mean, firstly, they last time, especially our black men who somehow feel this message of white nationalism resonates with them. You know, uh, but we tend to find out later. I mean, there are so many people that found out internationally. I mean, we can talk about the DA here in South Africa, the black people who were in the DA, your Musi Maimanes, the Van Dam lady, Lindiwe Mazibuko. I mean, you name them. And then in the US, there are many who found out too, you know. So, but why would ordinary working class people find this to resonate with them? And it makes me curious because you see that this, if you look at Red Pill, Manosphere, and all the right wing groups, it all um, centers around the most base instincts, the most base human instincts, ego and all of that. Um, and I know and I think one of the ways they did the messaging so well is because they understand how the mind of a man works, and you would make otherwise irrational choices to satisfy your ego, and now you find out that yeah, it's not what you thought. But yeah, that's really what I thought we should look into. It's a curious question, you know because it's this gang, your family values, shared values. It's not about race, it's about shared values. And then you get excluded in leadership roles and you wonder why. you know um, yeah, I'm particularly keeping up with brother Byron Donalds in the US there, Trump's number one fan, trying to see how his career is going and how things are going to end up. I think so far he hasn't had much joy, but hey, who knows? Daddy, Daddy's back. Daddy might be merciful. That's literally what the guy said when he was talking about Donald Trump. Daddy's back. But yeah, I I think there's also a contradiction there in that as a man, this kind of messaging plays to your ego, but at the same time, especially as a black man, for you to participate in those messages and even participate in it, right? We've seen it with all the different channels where you have to constantly do that. And I wonder why. You must either get paid real good or you really are a believer or something like that. But yeah, it's quite interesting. A lot has happened politically since the elections. Um, I think the mega base is now finding out that they don't have anything really in common with Elon Musk and Donald Trump. That's the billionaire class. I mean, and again, it's there's a that make believe, where you talk about all these shared values that maybe you have Elon Musk on your podcast and you talk about family values and and all that stuff and all that anti-woke rhetoric, as they call it, whatever. But then you go back to your lived reality. So you see the difference between make believe, where you are in an emotional refreshment session with your right wing buddies, and then you go back home to your lived reality as a working class person. You know, since you're not a billionaire. So they're beginning to find out the realities of their lived experience, away from that rhetoric, that you do online, where you can go in and say whatever awful things you can think about, women, because you are angry at women because your ex-girlfriend hurt you, but then, after those sessions, and then you have to deal with reality, it hits you, you know, then the question of class becomes real because that's got to do with bread and butter issues. And so much about debating online, about things that really are not having any real material impact um, on your political and social life, you know. Um, and I think that's one of the weaknesses of the right wing thing because it assumes that you exist in some religious bubble, and yet you exist in a world, and that's why it ends up leading to the pursuit of narrow national interests. And then it forgets that, by the way, these days we live in an interconnected world. Geopolitics these days, is a real thing. Um, and international politics is unavoidable. So these right wing types tend to focus on very narrow interests. Um, and yeah, when I look at the US empire and where it is right now, and some of the decisions that have been made, um, internationally, the US will be isolated. Um, I mean, now you saw I put up a picture of Trump and Zelensky, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, visited the US to sit down with Donald Trump, and boy, the US media says it turned out into a shouting match, more than a diplomatic engagement. But basically, Trump is just pissing off everyone, US enemies, allies, in betweens, everything. Canada, Mexico, Greenland, Panama. Ain't nobody safe. North, south, east, and west. And that's the perfect recipe for isolation. And that's why I think, yeah, man, hey, you know, like I said last time, as much as I don't agree with Donald Trump's politics, but his decisions, man, I find them useful for us in the global south. That is naturally going to lead to the decline of the US empire. Um, but I did want to say this. You know, one of the most impressive American politicians, perhaps not impressive in terms of being a good human being, but I mean, just as a politician who represents American interests. You remember Henry Kissinger, your former Secretary of State? Henry Kissinger, this was his readings. This was his prescribed readings. You see this? Niccolo Machiavelli, the prince. This talks about power dynamics. It talks about how a ruler or a prince or a president or whatever can, you know, be strategic in how they approach things so that they make the best decisions for their country, to remain ever competitive. And if their country is dominant, to remain dominant. And really, it's not even about country, it's just about your principality or your realm of influence. So, reading a bit, I think for Donald Trump and the Trump fan, if you were curious, maybe you might want to inform yourself a bit better, or, about politics. I think The Prince is a good place to start. I also found it a useful read, you know. So, it talks about power and how it works. And maybe you might be able to look at your position differently once you read this, because in the world of politics, in the world of geopolitics, no one is invulnerable. You know, And so yeah, we'll wait to see what is going to happen, and where the U.S. empire is going with this, with Donald Trump and everything. But yeah, I see decline ultimately. But you know, you can tell me what you think. Um, but I do see decline uh, that is happening gradually and very systematically and consistently. There is now incredible internal unrest and protest against policies that are hurting the ordinary working class, to the advantage of billionaires and the elite, the ruling class. There is conflict with the rest of the world by the US, starting conflict and antagonizing everyone. So, I mean, for me, as I'm just looking, it's the perfect recipe for decline. And again, I like what Richard Wolff said that and I mean, Richard Wolff is an American economist and a professor of economics. And he said Americans need to accept the empire is gone. And, you know, when Trump says we're going to make America great again, it's not realistic because historically, when we look, we don't have an example of an empire that started to go into decline and then they reclaimed their glory days magically somehow. Not going to happen. But we will see how this progresses. Um, I think it's an interesting time to observe politics globally because I'm looking at all of these things globally. I'm looking at what's happening in South Africa, what's happening between South Africa and the US, looking at what's happening in the US with Elon Musk and the Trump and the MAGA crew. And I'm looking at the right wing forces here. And I think it is an interesting time politically to observe what is taking place. The resurgence of right wing politics and white nationalist politics, particularly white Christian nationalist politics, because this thing has a religious element to it as well. You know, there's a huge part of the MAGA base that has made their decision based on religion, and then it goes with that thing of family values and all of that. So yeah, let me leave it at that for now. Today didn't go as I had planned, but I hope we can engage more on this in future and try to figure out what the technical glitch was today. But later, um, I hope you have a good evening.